early hip hop culture, which of course in its infancy in the late 70s and early 80s, where the story begins, had a lot of important players in it, including the 12 artists in our exhibition, and of course including Basquiat. Basquiat's role in hip hop, I think, has been really understated, in at least in art history, but not by the many rappers who have made shout outs to him on various tracks, and noted that in 1983 he produced this seminal track in hip hop history called Beat Bop. And even sadly, the day he died in 1988, he had plans to attend a Run DMC live show that night. So his intersections with hip hop have really, really, as I said, been understated. And we hoped that you, as a defining figure of hip hop, could speak a little bit to his legacy and influence on hip hop culture and talk to us about your own projects. I wanted to start with a question about your work is so highly visible in the realms of music, but I think lesser known is how your practice intersects with the visual arts. You've cited Mark Rothko and Jean-Michel Basquiat as source material and inspiration for past and future projects. You assisted Futura painting in his studio. So where did your interest in visual art begin, and where is it taking you now?
I always wanted to make, always wanted to create. So I've always been a creative, and that went into me writing for like a little classroom comic book that we had in like the first grade, second grade. And then it became, I'm good at telling stories. I'm good at writing things and telling things and stuff like that. So of course, culturally, you get right into rap, so around 11, 12 years old, you get into, I can tell these stories and make raps out of them. Basically, raps is telling stories. I'm good at telling stories. I'm gonna be a rapper. So that was the one that's been the longest running, I all through high school, got very serious with it. Then into, got my record deal when I was still kind of in high school. So I was kind of straight into the league. And then for the past, 15 years, I've been Lupe Fiasco. But that search for the creative input, or creative output, however you want to call it, the IO, whatever. It landed into, I want to, the same, process of reference and putting stories and messaging together. It's not just located into stories. It's not just located in the audible. It's not just located in writing raps. It's also in, I got a great idea for some photography, and like, now I have a great idea for a painting. And like, now I have a great idea for some mixed media. And I have a great idea for that. And so kind of in between the teeth of my rap career, I started to do photography, and just went around chasing subjects and doing little things. And then it was something where it's like, what? I would really like to make a painting, but it's like, I don't know how to paint. So I'm gonna get somebody to paint this for me. I'm gonna do like a Jeff Koons, pay somebody to paint this thing for me type situation. And my friend who I asked to paint this thing for me told me no. And was like, why don't I teach you how to do it? And so I became an apprentice with one of my friends. And then I was like, okay, I need to go to online art school to really get into the nuts and bolts of painting and color theory and composition and blah, blah, blah. As I'm still rapping, as I'm still doing Show Goes On and Kick Push and being a superstar and blah, 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 blah. I'm attentive to kind of brushstrokes and learning and diving deep into artists and their careers and their reference points and their influences and inspirations. So I've been doing that for maybe like the past 8-9 years in that capacity, and done some shows. At one point I'm actually a member at the MFA on the low. I was doing a tour of a bunch of museums around the world in the process of learning, right? So the learning process of becoming, I guess you can call it, a visual artist. I still think, to use Futura's language from his talk, I still feel like I'm kind of a phony. So I'm trying to just be as authentic as I possibly can and still work through the process. So part of that is why I became a member at the MFA and a bunch of other museums, to really just look at those places as institutions of learning that I can't get maybe going back to school wise type of situations. And I had the pleasure and the opportunity to kind of piggyback Futura around the world, you know, a legend and a father figure to me, and one of those foundational members of rap too. Like Futura didn't mention this in his talk, but Futura actually has a rap from way back then. So he has a rap record from way back then, which is fire too. Like, and it's like super long. Like he's getting bars out. So even to be with a seminal figure, have the opportunity to be around a seminal figure like Futura, who not only is a fantastic painter and a grandmaster of his craft, but he also is a rapper, you know. And it's like, wow, like you were one of the early prototypes, you know, primal movers of this thing that I do today and make a living off of and able to share with the world. You were an impactful figure in that. So, you know, yeah, that's my kind of blurb on my visual approaches, you know.
Amazing. I was also shocked, and you of all people should not have imposter syndrome on any account. So many of the most important artists in our history are self-taught. You know, Jean-Michel Basquiat, of course, you know, included. Can you tell us a little bit about how you first encountered, maybe it was in that process of learning about the visual arts, but Jean-Michel's work specifically, and what it came to mean to you?
I was thinking about that all last night. I was like, when did I first, you know, get introduced to Basquiat? And it's the same thing with like Futura. It's like, when did we first meet? Like, how did that happen? It's all kind of like a blur. But I do know the context in which I was introduced to not only Jean-Michel, but also Futura and Calls and a flurry of other kind of street artists, and now becoming some of the premier fine artists in the world, was through Hypebeast. So there's a website called Hypebeast, and I was one of the first members of Hypebeast. You know, one of the first guys trying to chase down this pair of sneakers, this interesting T-shirt. Not knowing nothing about street culture or anything like that, or the extent of it and where things were coming and what the reference points were. You just see an interesting pair of shoes that isn't all white, you know, because you're like, oh, I just need a pair of white shoes. And it's like, oh, that shoe has a black stripe. No, this one has a picture on it. No, that one has a little interesting logo, and this one has an interesting colorway. And when you start to get into the, you know, shout out to Kevin Ma, who started Hypebeast and all of the early Hypebeasters back in the day. You immediately start to recognize that there's a relationship between product and art, of course. And I say that people like myself are the licensed generation, you know. So we get the products or the byproducts of those eras in the form of, you know, brands, you know, in the form of like collaborations and T-shirts and sneakers and toys. So my first introduction to, say, Futura was, you know, in this hunt, there's, you know, where do you go to find this stuff? What shoe is that? What figure is that? You say, oh, if you ever go to New York, you know, Lower East Side, you got to go to 360 Toy Group, you know, and you go to 360 Toy Group in the LES. And while you're there, make sure you hit up North too, because you got to go to North and then hit, you know, slide through Supreme, but you got to do 360. And so you go into 360 Toy Group, and Jaquan is there, you know, the owner and proprietor. He's there, and he's this nexus of all of these influences and streams of art and legacies, from, you know, all over, from, you know, the New York scene to what's happening in Japan, to what's happening in Hong Kong, to what's happening in little parts of Taiwan. There might be something jumping, and anything that is producing product. You know, Jaquan has, you know, he's one of those places, or was one of those places, unfortunately, that brought a lot of these things together. So my first time, you know, going into 360 Toy Group, just, you know, a virgin, and seeing like, you know, you got all this stuff on the shelf, which is pretty cool, but then there's the upper shelf where none of that stuff is for sale. And that's where like all the cool stuff is. And you're like, yo, what's that? You know, and that is like a little kid, you know, and this is me, you know, with a career, with a video, with the MTV, with the whole thing, by myself, kind of backpacking through Lower East Side looking for this toy store that I seen on Hypebeast, you know. And you go in and it's like, you know, what is that? And Jaquan is like, yo, that is Futura. You know, that is some figures that he did with Metacom via this music collaboration that he did, and that's what that is. And that's the first time you see like, oh my God, what is this? Who is that? Oh, I need. And then you look across from this, you know, sold out Futura collection, and there's this one shoe, you know, it's one shoe, and you looking at the shoe, and you're like, what's that? Who's that? And he's like, oh, that's Cause. That's his collaboration with DC Shoes, and Cause is da 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 da. And you're like, okay, I can't wait to get back to the internet because I'm going to, you know, rabbit hole myself for a few weeks, you know, pulling all this in. So Basquiat is the same way. A majority of us know Basquiat because of the crown, you know, that logo, you know, that significance of royalty, and that iconic kind of piece. And then you kind of get from there, maybe you step into the rabbit hole that is the life of Jean-Michel. But you might just end at a couple paintings, a couple things, but you won't go really, really deep. And fortunately, you know, I had a chance to go to London, and I was in a store called DPMHI, which again is like another one of those cross sections of anything that's producing product of interest and of rarity will land at this store. And I went in there and I seen a pair of shoes. And it was like, yo, like those shoes are crazy. Like there's this crazy stitching on it. And you look at the bottom and it's this crazy figure. And then you look at the thing. And then what do you see? You see the crown. You're like, oh, yo, is that, you know, you make this connection, this reference point from the crown that you were seeing just kind of scattered about in randomly in culture. Then you start to say, oh, that's his signature, Jean-Michel Basquiat. Oh, yo. So it all starts from kind of like this product. And me, the type of person and the way I analyze and the way I research, I'm a super nerd. A lot of people know this, even though I'm one of the coolest rappers too, but I'm also a diehard nerd. I'm the type of person, when I go to the MFA or to a museum, I'll look at the painting very quickly. I'm like, that's interesting. That's cool. But then I'm reading, you know, the placard on the side. I'm that guy. I'm that guy who's like not even looking at the painting, but I'm reading because I want to know the motivations and the interest and the inspirations. So you get this shoe, and then that shoe becomes the doorway. You know, it becomes the footprint to follow, the breadcrumbs of, you know, this person who if you go a little bit behind the surface, you go a little bit deeper than just general culture or general collaboration, you start to realize that this dude was this, you know, a grand master of our time. He is, when I say our Picasso, he's hip hop's Picasso, you know. He is our modern day avant-garde savant, of just a painter, but then as just as a figure, as a cultural, you know, tour de force. So he's you're like, I'm into Japanese fashion, I'm into clothes. Then you're okay, Comme des Garçons, right? It's like, oh, Comme des Garçons, yeah, you know, I got some Comme des Garçons, I'm trying to flex. And then in the process of that, who do you see? Jean-Michel Basquiat walking down the runway at Comme des Garçons. You're like, oh, yo, he's back, you know, like, oh, right? And you just start to, you know, from that point, once the you know, the recognition that this guy was a force, you want to know about his life. You want to know where he came from, like his relative. He's Black like me. Oh my God, you know. I want to know more about his life. I want to know more about his creative process. I want to know more about the things that he's done. And you know, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to play it, for me, I look at it as a fortunate process. It's you have to do the work to access it, because you can't just walk up to the street of your local gallery, your local museum, and they're gonna have a Basquiat in it, right? He's so rarefied, so wanted by the world at large. You know, it's hard to find more than one Basquiat on display somewhere, right? So I say that to say you got to do the work, right? So you might just end up with the book, right? And you get the book, and now that becomes your, like, I can't wait to see that painting, Then you get a word that, yo, there's a Basquiat show in New York, yo, there's a Basquiat show at Louis Vuitton, yo, there's a Basquiat. You like, I'm on it, let's go, you know? And you're referencing those paintings kind of similar to how Curator was saying. You know, he remembers seeing paintings at the show, remembering Basquiat working on them. Like, yo, that painting, I remember Basquiat at his house, at his studio, working on it, and I'll see it in the show. For us, it was like this book. you know, or the back of his sneaker, or the back. It's like, yo, that's the thing from the thing. And but because you have to put in that work to access his work, once you get to it, the appreciation is so crazy. You know, like the you feel like I've put in so much effort to go, you know, dig into the body of his work, really get an understanding beyond just being visually stimulated, but into the messaging, into the philosophy, into the schematic of revolution that some of his paintings are, how he's really speaking politically to injustice, how he's really speaking to all of these things, which is hip hop. You know, it is the visualization and the I don't want to call it the commodification, but the three-dimensional objectivity of rap, of what hip hop is. If you had to paint it, you know, if it was a painting, it had to be expressed visually. It's like it would be Basquiat, you know. And I think that leans heavy when you see people like Jay-Z or people like Swiss Beats, people who can actually afford a Basquiat painting, but seeing them so active and referencing and pushing, right, and seeing his narrative and then using that, especially Swiss Beats, using that narrative of his life and saying like, okay, I need to be that gallery person who pushed Basquiat for this next generation. You know, I need to put myself in a position because I know that, you know, there's more Basquiats. The culture and the society and the same mechanisms that produce Basquiat are still at work and at play, fortunately and unfortunately. And in that, there are Basquiats being born. I want to be on the cutting edge of making sure that those people, you know, are pushed out and successful. So I think a lot of Basquiat, you know, it isn't far of a stretch to say, you know, Basquiat's influence on hip hop is probably more optimal to say that Basquiat is hip hop.
I think of a figure like Fab Five Freddy when you're talking about Swiss Beats, like Fab being this kind of like philosophical crafter of all these connections and networks that eventually became post-graffiti culture, and certainly Ram LZ as well, being the first and foremost philosopher about graffiti letters. And Basquiat is, I think, in his time more loosely linked to hip hop and thought of in relation to like post-punk because of his amazing band Grey, but yet hip hop, as you've spoken to, really claims him. But punk and rock and hip hop, were they really that separate in this time? Do you think that Jean-Michel is kind of a lone figure in uniting them, or and are they really that separate today in your own practice?
No, I actually have a punk band called Japanese Cartoon. So that's that part, you know, and influenced by Ian Curtis and Joy Division, and I want to sing in a British accent and be weird and thrash around on stage. But I think at that time, and I study, you know, kind of late 70s, you know, this formative, at least the commercial face of hip hop, when hip hop started to go commercial. And if you study that era in the early 80s, you see that hip hop is still trying to figure out what it is, right? And there is no real separate, like you have hip hop bands touring or performing with punk bands in the same venue on the same stage with, you know, so it's not too much wearing the same clothes, you know, in certain capacity. So even aesthetically, visually, fashion-wise, that there's still these relationships. And you see disco still in there, providing the backing soundtrack to a lot of early kind of rap and early hip hop in a certain capacity. And I think in that time it was just this crucible, right? And it was mixing. And again, to Futura's point, you see something like Rapture, right? Being this, you know, here is, if you have to take a snapshot of where it is at the time in terms of its progression and how it's kind of all congealing, you see something like Rapture, where you got this white woman rapping, this dude doing, there's like a black guy in a tuxedo and a top hat doing ballet. Then you got another guy over here, you know, like Futura said, you got Basquiat DJing, right? You got Fab Five Freddy reference over here. You got Lee over here. And it's just like this, and it feels like a punk rock video, but then there's like a dance that is like just weird, like soup, right? This chunko nabe, right? This weird stew that's happening. And I think in that kind of, process, you start to get the formation of what hip hop is gonna be, right? Like, what is it gonna be, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? You start to see it start to kind of congeal and go that play. And you see disco kind of die off. Disco kind of gives off this is what I add to the pot. You see punk kind of separate into something else, but this is what I left. This is punk's piece. You get, this almost like hip hop is kind of like this baby that was born that kind of grew up in the midst of all those influences. And then it's like, okay, now you're getting kicked out the house, now go out to the world and propagate and prosper and do what you need to do. So I think there's this interesting kind of period of time, or this moment in time where hip hop kind of detached from that crucible, that mix. It jumped up out the stew and went on to become what it is today. And then you get all the refinements and everything else going into it. But you can still see the reference points. You can still go back and identify where this particular thing started to germinate, where this particular thing started to generate. And then you can see where it just becomes recursive today. And what we do, where we might feel sometimes that we're being so avant-garde or so new or so fresh, and you can find a reference point somewhere back in the 80s, late 70s, mid 80s, where the Basquiats and the Futuras and the Lees and the Fab Five Freddys and all these people were still cooking. And even to the point with Fab Five Freddy is so, like, he's such a phenomenal power, it's almost scary. Well, like, Fab Five Freddy was part of Crucial Conflict, which was this hip hop group that came out of Chicago that I was a huge fan of, right? And you look at the back of the CD and you're like, yo, who's part of this thing, Crucial Conflict? And you see Fab Five Freddy, right? Not to mention Yo MTV Raps and all of those other things. So, people like Fab, Fab Five Freddy, are there's no way you can disconnect them from what this is. And because you can't disconnect Fab, you can't disconnect Basquiat, you can't disconnect Future, you can't. I think even if they wanted to leave and go become like super fuddy-duddy Italian art scene guys like that, I think because they're the source material and their foundations and how those foundations are still being replayed today, they'll always be here, always.
Too important. Yep, too important. But every generation will kind of pick up those threads in their own way. And that's what's sort of magic about something that is so strong. It can birth so many new movements, so many new forms of cultural expression. So on that note, can you tell us a little bit more in depth and get as technical as you can about your Jean-Michel Basquiat project, Skulls, the research process you went into, and what you think it might look like for us, your fans who are awaiting this someday?
Oh my God, Skulls, bam. So around maybe, okay, so my work, what I feel is my best work, just in general from a creative standpoint, and where I always kind of find myself falling back to, a prototype. And I just literally gave it a name like maybe last year, because it took me, retrospectively looking back through my work and seeing what stood out and what didn't. And one of the things that stood out was this thing that I call Resurrectives, right? So on my first album, Food and Liquor, they had a song in there called The Cool, produced by Kanye West. And it was me riffing off of Thriller, right? So I see Thriller, I'm like, yo, the biggest phenomenal, the biggest phenoms in culture which never die are zombies, right? And I was just like, yo, okay, zombies, right? And I was like, okay, I need a song about zombies on my album, right? And then you get The Cool, you get the birth of The Cool, shout to Miles Davis, right? But you get the birth of The Cool in that process of referencing Michael Jackson's Thriller, right? And then it's okay, let me write this story, let me, give my little, dress it up how I dress it up. And then it goes on to become, the foundation, for the next album, so now the next second album is the entire album. And you start to expand the storyline of bringing things back to life. And so that process of, bringing things back to life, creating projects around bringing things back to life became almost like a cheat code for me, where it was like, you know what, I can do that really good. People react to it really well. And if I refine that process, it becomes even more of something of interest above and beyond just a piece of music. And so I went on to start creating these, you can call them almost portraits. Well, I'll separate the portraits and come back to that. But on terms of the Resurrectives, I wrote this song called, there was a little girl named Janila, who was unfortunately killed in Chicago a few years ago. A little baby, got shot in the midst of this very unfortunate situation, and she died. And for me, it was a huge blow. It was so, trying to fight the good fight for the city. And then for something that tragic to happen, and it's sent a shockwave through the whole city. Even like hardcore killers and gangbangers, everybody was just kind of like shook that the streets were capable of producing such things. And I didn't want her to die, And I remember being in the studio, and I was like, I don't want that baby. I don't want Janila to die. So I did a song called Janila Forever, and crafted it where the storyline started as her as a child, and you see her grow up, and you see these other things, and she grows up to become a doctor, and then she witnesses the shooting, and then goes and performs triage and is able to save the child, who is revealed at the end of the song is herself, right? And it was it was the most emotion I've probably ever put into a record, and put it out, and it was just this people who I didn't expect to react to it reacted to it. And it was kind of like, in that unfortunateness, it's a way of taking something very terrible and turning it into something beautiful, right? And so I went on to do it again with Alan Kurdi, the young boy who fell off the side of the boat as he was leaving Libya, trying to get to Europe with his family. He fell off the boat and drowned. And that was another one. Was like, let me jump in and save him, and bring him back to life. And again, the same way, he grows up, becomes a swimmer, becomes a diver, sees the kid fall off the boat, he jumps in the water, brings him back to life, performs CPR, saves him, right? And in that process saves itself, and it goes on forever. So you have this piece of these Resurrectives. And then I got into, it's rare that you see artists pay homage to other artists through art, right? With a piece. And when you see something like Basquiat with his plates, painting Fab Five Freddy, painting Futura, I was like, who does that in rap? Like who's doing that for rappers, or who's doing that in rap for other artists? So I wanted to kind of take up that mantle of doing portraits of people lyrically with raps. And the first one that I did was of Mark Rothko, right? Huge Mark Rothko fan, huge abstract expressionist fan, huge New York scene fan, the old New York, the old New York, so not just 80s New York, old 50s New York. Huge fan of that scene. And I was like, okay, in order to do this portrait, I need to know what I'm talking about. So I just dug into Mark Rothko's life. I got books, studied documentaries, studied his paintings, studied how things configured, his early periods, his surrealist period, visited Rothko Chapel, just the whole kind of gambit of research and process as much as I could to get, at least when I told this story, that the factual parts of it would be factually correct. I wouldn't be infringing upon anybody and making their family upset. And so I did that in 3 pieces, and it was Mark Rothko it was Rothko for humans, Rothko for cyborgs, Rothko for computers, and then took the waveforms of the recording, and it looked like a Rothko painting, and each progressive song had a different waveform pattern. And then I took those, and they became the album artwork for it, and I only did 1 copy, and I gave it to MIT. So it's actually sitting in Boston at MIT, the mother copy of Rothko. And then I turned my sights on just other artists beyond Rothko, and it was, Royce the 5'9" from Detroit. He was an amazing rapper out of Detroit, and wrote a portrait for him, portraits of Royce, to show, how much I appreciate what you do and who you are, and a little bit of your story, and a little fanciful, and a little of this. Now I'm working on something with Amy Winehouse, in the same capacity, a little bit bigger of a project. So all that to set up that about 2012, I was like, you know who needs this? Basquiat. And I remember seeing, I was like, okay, I'm going to do a biography or autobiography. I don't know what you properly call it. Autobiography, biography, you write it for somebody else. I don't know. I think it's biography, right? I was like, I'm gonna do this biography of Basquiat, and it's gonna be, I'm at the end of my record contract with my record company. This is my last album, is going to be a portrait of Basquiat and a Resurrected in certain capacities, and a full-length album. The Rothko piece was one song. It was 3 songs, actually. The Royce da 5'9" was like 1 verse. The Amy Winehouse piece is going to be like maybe 6 or 7 songs. But the Basquiat was going to be a full album, And so I started the research process of like, okay, who do I need to talk to? What do I need to watch? What do I need to see? So got all the autobiographies and books and painting catalogs and documentaries and movies. And luckily I had access to Fab Five Freddy. And I called Fab up, just like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing this thing on Basquiat's life. What do I need? I'm a student. What do I need to do? How do I make this correct? Is it something that is wanted? Is it something that's needed? Is it something that I should do? Is it disrespectful? Will people take it the wrong way? What are some things, some cues that you can kind of give me, since you know him very so well in part of his career? And I just sat down and talked with Fab Five Freddy for, I don't even know how long, but talked to him for a nice bit to kind of polish off all of this other kind of academic research that I'd done before I started writing. So then I started to gather the music, pull the beats in, start to write a couple choruses, and really just started to do the work of translating that analysis and research into actual verses and actual words and sentences, verses and stuff like that. And in that process, was I usurped by a really good friend of mine by the name of Mickey Fax, who's a great rapper from the Bronx. And while we're on this, and we're talking about Basquiat and geniuses who kind of went out in their primes or pre-primes. Today we just lost one of the best MCs of all time. A master at his craft by the name of Fred the Godson, who just passed away from I want to say complications with COVID-19. So even we now, even as Futura was kind of referencing people who had passed away in his process and in the 80s in that scene, we today in our craft, which we love and cherish so much as Future and all of those guys love and cherish their scene and their craft, we're losing Basquiats, to what's going on now. He was a great fixture in our scene, and we're gonna miss him. But Mickey Fax, I kind of gave him wind of like, yo, I'm doing this thing on, this Basquiat thing. And he was like, yo, I'm working on this project called Mouse, where it's not the life of Basquiat, but I'm inserting myself, ahistorically, into the 1980s New York scene, right? And pretending that I am an artist of that era, and I'm inserting myself fictionally into, Keith Haring and Futura and Fab Five Freddy and Basquiat, and I'm referencing and meeting them on the way. And not only am I doing that, I'm actually living that. So he went and slept in the park and like was jumping on police cars, and to really, really like do some method acting in terms of building out this character. And I was so blown away, right, that I was like, I can't do this. He's one up me. He did the old, there's this great story, Andy Warhol and Lichtenstein, right? Where Lichtenstein, Warhol was doing the comic book prints, and then he's seen like Lichtenstein's and was like, yours are better. I'm gonna just paint these cans because you can have the comic book strips and everything. I'm gonna just do this. So I feel like we had our Warhol Lichtenstein moment in that piece. So I kind of put it to the side, and I pulled out the life of Basquiat angles where I was already forward in creating the you know, certain choruses. So there was a song called Seance. It was actually, I think it was called Brooklyn. And is Brooklyn in the house? And it was really, you know, referencing Basquiat's birth. And that would have been the point where he would come back to life kind of through this seance, right? And you actually, it acts if Brooklyn is in the house, but imagine doing that kind of around of a Ouija board, kind of medium seance type thing to kind of resurrect him again, right? And you had other songs like it's called Live Dangerous, where the chorus still is, and I'll say was, it still is, where it was, you know, I want to live dangerous by any means. I want to be famous, but I want to be famous by any means. I want to live dangerous in limousines, which references kind of the end where he was in a limousine, you know, or supposed to get a limousine and go see Run DMC at Madison Square Garden and all of that stuff. And then referencing other parts of his life and his story where it was this raw force to make it, you know, to conquer the art world and be somebody and do that by any means necessary, right? Kind of a situation. So it was things like artifacts of that are kind of still left in the process. And I started to write other songs around them. And then just kind of put it, you know, to the side. And this was back in like 2012, maybe 2011, somewhere around there. And, you know, at post that, you see folks like Jay-Z really embrace Basquiat and throw him in the out again. You see Swiss Beats, you see other folks in the hip hop community reference his work and push him out there and give him the kind of credit and to the new generation, right? Not to the new generation. And so I felt like, oh, well, that work's already being done. You know, people are pushing out the life of Basquiat. You see now, even the last Basquiat show I saw was at Louis Vuitton, which is super interesting because it's like you're going to see Basquiat, now Virgil's running Louis Vuitton, and Basquiat, Virgil at the right, the connections just keep coming back. And it was just kind of like, you know, his legacy is great. You know, his legacy is safe. It doesn't require me to do it. But now I'm so motivated. I was like, oh man, maybe I should go back and finish that work, you know, and put it out there to the world.
We need your Warhol cans.
Was it Liechtenstein? Was it? I want to be sure that it was Liechtenstein, or am I misquoting?
I mean, Liechtenstein is the one who does the comic book works of the Ben-Day dots. So
yeah. So it was Liechtenstein. So there was that story of, you know, I felt usurped. I felt that Mickey had done it better, and I was like, because you did it better, I can't do it. I can't be one up. I'm going to move on to Amy Winehouse then, since you're going to do that. But now I actually feel motivated through the conversation, and when you all reached out, and Sky and everybody reached out and brought that up. It is something that was super relevant to me, and even the title Skulls comes from one of the titles that somebody just kind of gave to one of Basquiat's untitled works, which is one of his famous headpieces. And so it's like, oh, that's the name of the album, Skulls. You know,
we've been showing images from Basquiat's series Anatomy from 1982, which is his first portfolio of silkscreen prints that draws from Gray's Anatomy, the important scientific medical book that he used to study different parts of the human body and learned to draw by copying them as a child when he was in the hospital recovering from an accident and had his spleen removed. So those are the images that viewers have been seeing on the screen, and the body was obviously so central, including the skull as such a primary part of the body to Basquiat's practice. So apt that you've titled the project that, and I can only hope that we provide some motivation. Maybe you can get it out in time for our show to open.
Yeah, or even come maybe finish off a few of the songs and maybe just come and perform those. That might be kind of cool.
Would be so honored.
Yeah,
so I wanted to ask one final question of you, Lupe, which is what other projects are you working on in this moment? Do you have any advice on how to stay focused and stay productive for so many artists who are struggling in this moment, and maybe even some directions for institutions that are looking for new ways to get their creativity out there in the world?
I mean, just create, you know. For me, there's, you know, painting. I got my little studio set up around the corner here on my coffee table, a little laptop and thing, and hurriedly working away and whittling away at songs day by day as the days wane.
Can you tell us a little bit about that painting, actually?
This painting right here, yeah,
yeah,
it's a commission actually for a collector based out of Hong Kong, who's actually one of my business partners. So shout to Bonnie. This is Bonnie's painting, so she's probably like super happy because I didn't show it to her. It was supposed to be in her, supposed to ship it to New York prior to all of the COVID-19 stuff, so that kind of put a dent in the plans. So this is her first time seeing it. But yeah, I do. My work is, we talk about skulls. I looked at it as being, again, I'm reference points. So I'm all about taking this little thing and interpolating it with this, and interpolating it with that, and interpolating with this. And when I got into visual work, you're looking for things to do, and it's like everything has been done before, so to speak. What is there new to do? And it's really to interpolate, to take the things that inspire you, the artists, or the scenes, or the periods or epochs, styles that speak to you as an artist, and things that you can actually accomplish and do. I can't, do photorealistic drawings of people's faces, but I can take multiple reference points and incorporate them together. So, I always say that my skulls come from Cézanne. My favorite paintings are, Cézanne's skull paintings, his vanitas. And then my textures come from Kazuo Shiraga, so it's like, I love, his version of action painting, and then what's left, the artifacts and the things that are left, of him painting with his feet, which is like, oh my God, this dude's, tied himself to the ceiling, painting with his feet, and come out with these things. And so it's like, oh, I want to capture those textures in my figure, with Kazuo Shiraga. My colorways are Francis Bacon. It's like, I love taking these pinks and these blues and these oranges and these other kind of things, and mishmashing all those things together. And then the era that I kind of love is, Catholic, kind of Christian church paintings, and scenes of like Golgotha and ossuaries and charnel houses and memento moris, and things that come in and tell that type of story of the remembrance of life through death, the embrace of death, constantly staying on your toes and reminding yourself to live the complete life, because the dance of death is right around the corner, and to make the most out of things. So for me, that is the source of my paintings, and how I approach materiality, how I approach composition and stuff like that. And it takes me a long ass time to do them, so they're very sparse. they're not quick processes. So for you artists out there that are trying, maybe if you need that immediate gratification, make sure you pick something that you can at least show proof of by the end of the day. Don't do something that takes a few weeks or months to kind of complete. And I think just kind of stay focused. Some of the futurists at this earlier, he referenced, with artists are kind of sitting in their studios and in their living rooms, and people who aren't even artists, people who used to have a very technical job and are now forced to, create or pushed to now be creative in a certain capacity. The sign of the times. There's a rich environment of, emotion and struggle and pain and things that need to be articulated, that beg to be articulated and beg to be archived and beg to be drawn in these times. And it's no different from a lot of these, the painting, the Catholic paintings, which a lot of the memento mori and the vanitas paintings, they come out of plague. They come out of the plague eras and people trying to find some type of meaning and reasoning behind what's going on, and they articulate it through plague paintings or scenes of vanitas and the limit, the fragility of life, in every season, whether it be the tuberculosis era of painting and people romanticizing that era, or people really just trying to come to terms, even with Basquiat in his last painting, right, which was him, right, with death, basically, behold a white horse, kind of pale horse, pale rider type situation. And this is his last painting referencing, projecting his death. And I think in those periods of time where it may be macabre and it may be sad, fight for that, create, don't go, what they say, don't go quiet into the rage into the dying of the light. Now's the time for creatives to really be inspired and create, mercilessly, with no regard for what people say or think or feel, to just really get your shit off, as we say in the rap world.
Well, you are an inspiration. Thank you so much for putting so much art in so many different forms out into the world. Thank you for being a nerd. Thanks for reading those labels. Curators and researchers work so hard to write at the MFA and elsewhere.
I don't mean to cut you off, but I do want to send a shout out to the MFA, all of the curators, all of the people who are temporarily out of work right now, and the things that you do, and not just the MFA, but every other artistic institution and academy that's on a hiatus right now. And it's so important, the work that you guys and gals do, curating and archiving and present, even in the midst of things like this, still finding ways to be inventive, to curate the story of Jean-Michel Basquiat and his influence on what I do and what every other rapper and hip hop artist does, whether they are conscious of it or not. So I really, really appreciate you doing that and giving Futura that shine, who Futura is like, Big Papa. But really appreciate you for taking the time and doing this, even in the midst of what's going on right now.
Thank you so much, Lupe. We do what we do because of artists like you. So thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us. Come see us in the flesh soon. Peace out. Thanks.
Peace.